Hello, and welcome to another Conversations in Time podcast, the award-winning counterfactual history podcast that tops the What If charts. Enough of me, though. It's over to the guys.
Hello, and welcome to another Conversations in Time podcast. I'm John Henn.
And I'm Ian G.
So that's the second time we've done that.
Speaking the third time, I think, actually, John.
Third time, yeah.
Got there,
Yeah, well, but our listeners won't hear the first two. A feeble attempt.
Probably the most interesting part of the podcast, unfortunately, but never mind, let's see.
Oh, no, I think they like their meat and potatoes of the podcast, surely. Plus the adverts. There's a aperitif or a amuse-bouche. Or garnish is the way it's probably as well. Yeah, I'd consider it garnish, the old adverts.
Fair enough. Makes us a fortune, of course, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, and it certainly helps keep us at the top of the What If charts, our award-winning not industry leading, but chart-topping podcast.
Yep.
Just like to get that in. I mean, I've, when we were at the award ceremony. I mean, I know we were the only people there, the only people in the audience, and the only people who won. But yeah,
Not really. Then yeah, okay, you can't.
that's right. Yeah, go first.
Somebody thinks they're better than us. Let us know. We wouldn't be that surprised. But anyway, yeah.
Well, that's right. Yeah. Prove us wrong. Right. So the counterfactual bus has stopped yet again at a different stop. So where are we today, then, Ian?
So, our what if today would be what if the Ottoman Empire, which consists mostly of Turkey in terms of its ruling country, but obviously Turkey covered another part of the Eastern Med. What if the Ottoman Empire hadn't joined the First World War? So, I think just for, we're saying it's strictly neutral. So, strictly neutral doesn't join one side or another, much like some other European countries.
So the extent of the empire, I'm just looking at a map of the empire at the start of the war. So, I mean, like you say, it was mainly Turkey. I think it had parts of Greece as well. The other side of the...
Although, oddly, Greece had parts of what we would now consider Turkey. I say Greece. I mean, Greece in this modern sense is a very new thing and had very little clout in the late, early 20th century. But yeah, but you're right. It certainly had parts of Greece, what we consider Greece.
That's right, but those for me aren't the key ones in terms of the what if scenario, because they also include Israel, Jordan,
Lebanon,
Syria,
Saudi.
Not West Saudi, but
indeed,
sensitive bits that aren't desert that were uninhabited.
Mesopotamia, which is modern day Iraq.
Yeah,
So
quite in the modern, in today's sort of map, quite important. But that's where it was. So it was Turkey, and east of Turkey, part of the Red Sea coast of Saudi, and also the northern coast of Saudi and the Strait of Hormuz, sort of all the way up, like you say, to the borders with Armenia, into the Black Sea. So, right, okay, so. They keep a hands off, it's all hands off when it comes to the First World War. I can't remember why they joined.
Well, let's briefly go into that then.
Yeah,
it's quite complicated. I mean, there's no single reason why. There's a variety of factors. They were kind of bullied into it by Germany, and we'll come back to that in a second. Obviously, their arch rival in the area for centuries had been Russia. So Russia was on the opposite side from Germany. Their economy had been struggling for a number of years and had been bailed out by European countries, including Germany, but not exclusively Germany. They had their eye on some further territorial gains in the Balkans. Serbia, for example, they'd historically ruled Serbia for hundreds of years and had been chucked out in the 1800s. Parts of Romania, they had their eye on. So, a combination of things, and what's the word? Not ambition isn't quite strong enough, but there was a clique in the Ottoman governing elite that just liked the thought of increasing their empire, even though it was Crete, they wanted more. And the Germans bullied them into joining them. The Germans actually sent a couple of what we would consider pocket battleships, small battleships, to Istanbul parked them off Istanbul essentially, and trained the guns on them and said, "Would you like to join us?" And with all the other factors going on, that ship, the Gieben, is still there as a museum ship. But anyway, that was the final sort of straw that broke the camel's back, and they said, well, essentially yes. But there was a variety of reasons. So, they chose to take sides, and the sides they chose to take was the Germans for a variety of reasons: anti-Russian opportunities in the Balkans to grab stuff, willingness to actually join in, and well, they're going to join who we're going to join, and they chose to join the Germans, having their arm twisted to do so.
Yeah, I was just looking up why it was Germany. That was all. So like you say, they didn't want Russia in the where's that what's the where Turkey is, the what's that strait called?
Bosphorus.
The Bosphorus, yeah.
The Dardanelles, which is the pinch point in the Black Sea, obviously.
That's right, yeah. And Britain had already occupied Egypt, which used to be part of the Ottoman Empire, and Cyprus. So they're already being pushed back by Britain and France. And so I suppose that makes, at the end of the day, you can understand why if they were going to join, they were going to go on the side of the Germans.
Well, and if your arm's forced as well, if you're, it's a fait accompli to a certain extent. So yeah, and then obviously, moving forward a year or two, they were attacked by Britain and France. Britain wanted to use Turkey, or not use Turkey, but use the land of Turkey, so to speak, to enable it to go round the back of the German forces up through the Caucasus. Not as far as that, but up through the what's the sea? That's the river, the Danube, to attack Germany. That was Churchill's idea, and also to be able to send material, munitions, and such like to Russia up through that route. So they were attacked unsuccessfully. Obviously, we'll talk about that shortly, but in the Gallipoli campaign, initially an attempt to force the Straits, the Dardanelles, into the Bosphorus by ships alone. That failed. Some ships were lost to mines and stuff. And then obviously it was attacked by British and Commonwealth Dominion ships.
So you were saying that the battle cruiser was the Goeben, was it?
Yeah, the Gieben.
Yeah. Gieben, Goebe.
Yeah, it's German. Apparently Gieben, yeah.
Yeah, and apparently there was a light cruiser as well, the Breslau. No,
yeah, the Gieben. Yeah, the Gieben was that was a fairly disastrous Royal Navy debacle in terms of how they managed to get through the Mediterranean and into Turkey.
But they were disguised these were German ships disguised as Ottoman ships. Yeah, and they attacked some Russian ports and essentially dragged the Ottomans into the war.
Yeah.
All right, and then I didn't. It's funny. I suppose it's obvious when you think about it, but Russia, Britain, and France declared war on the Ottoman Empire in November 1914, like separately. It wasn't. I suppose they have to formally declare war before.
Well, that's what they did. That's what they did in those days. Nobody bothers now. People just destroy each other.
That's right. Yeah.
Civilian populations, without ever saying anything, making up mealy-mouthed nonsense nowadays, don't they? But in those days, well, you could argue they had a slightly better sense of what they were about, rather than just pretending that they weren't killing people. Oh, nothing to do with us. They did it all formally in those days.
So the First World War, you could almost, I won't say it was standalone, but it didn't really have much in connection with what was happening in Europe.
Well, it did, because the whole point of it, the whole point of it was because of the stalemate in Europe.
Fair enough, yeah.
Yeah, so, well, yeah, I mean, it only happened because there was a stalemate in Europe. Had there not been a stalemate in Europe, it wouldn't have happened at all. So, I mean, notoriously, infamously...
What was the month the First World War started? I can't even remember.
I can tell you about the Second World War, but I think it was summertime, so it was June, July, August. I think July.
So this was the Germans involved the Ottomans a few months later, then, by the sounds of it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm talking about the Gallipoli campaign. That 1915, that was an attempt to do something different by Churchill, who was the Chancellor of the Admiralty, head of the civilian head of the Royal Navy, a naval operation initially to force the Dardanelles, to force the Bosphorus, and then to open up routes into Russia, either to poke around at the back of the Germans or to actively support the. So the question is, and also there was major operations in Gaza, in Jordan, what is now Jordan, and up through up through the Euphrates, the river Euphrates, up through Iraq into what was then called Mesopotamia. Those are British Dominion forces, mostly Indian, but part of the British Indian Army. large battles, some horrendous sieges, like medieval type sieges, where lots of people died on both sides of typhoid and cholera and all that sort of stuff, and then people surrounded and were treated dreadfully by the Turks.
So what armies fought there? I mean, there was the British Navy. So was there a large?
There was a Royal well, in terms of the Gallipoli campaign, there was a Royal Navy and the French Navy. They were unsuccessful by trying to force. They used the old pre-dreadnought battleships. That's a whole different set of conversations. But let's not go into that. But there were pre-dreadnought battleships. Several were sunk by mines. One or two were sunk by German submarines. So then they decided they couldn't bombard the forts. They had to land behind the forts. So they landed certainly by the end of the campaign, hundreds of thousands of British and Commonwealth troops, French troops as well. Famously, the Anzac forces, although more British troops were killed in Anzac, but it's seen as the modern or the first.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, so were there more British troops than Anzac troops?
Yes.
Then,
as
a percentage. I mean, all right.
Yeah, but the reason that it's such an important thing in Australia Day, because it was Australia, is because it was seen as the first unilateral, independent Australian activity. So so it was, whereas Australian soldiers had served in the Boer War in the early 1900s, relatively small numbers, completely part of the British forces. Whereas there was the Australian New Zealand Army Corps. A corps is up to 3 to 4 divisions. That's up to 60 or 70,000 soldiers. So there was 60 or 70,000 Australian New Zealand troops there, self-contained. They had their own objectives. In terms of tactical objectives, so a self-contained force, and he did pretty well. About took horrendous casualties, but then everything.
There were 60,000 Anzac forces. So how many British? I don't know how many.
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know.
But it was more than 60,000.
Yeah, I think there was 2 British corps, so maybe 100 and something thousand. But again, these figures are in Google. Whatever they are, what they are.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't, So coming back to our counterfactual.
That would have happened. Yeah.
None of those things would have happened. I mean, Australia would still exist, and so would Australia. It would have those soldiers. I mean, those soldiers ultimately were all withdrawn and sent to France, so they would have been sent to France in the first place. Looking at our counterfactual, Turkey remains neutral. The question would be, I suppose, why would it remain neutral? Well, the most obvious reason to remain neutral in the war is because war is hell. You don't want to be involved in it. Now, there was still.
Yeah, I mean, if the Germans didn't force them into it, and they weren't going to do it on their own, then the only other antagonist was potentially Russia, really.
What do you mean antagonist?
Well, to force the Ottomans to fight.
Yeah, but they couldn't have forced the Turks to join them. They could have attacked them, and then obviously it would have offended.
No, that's what I mean. So if the Germans, there was obviously the Germans wanted them on their side as much as they wanted to join.
Yeah, essentially to protect their.
I mean, the British weren't going to suddenly start fighting the Ottomans just because they were fighting the Germans. Is what I'm saying.
No, it doesn't work like that, does it? I mean, you don't attack a neutral country unless you've got.
So if Russia had, all I'm saying is the only other way that the Ottoman Empire could have come into the First World War would have been by Russia attacking. If they didn't want to, if they wanted to stay neutral, if they wanted to remain outside. The only way to get dragged in is by somebody else attacking them, and the only other people who were likely to attack them were the Russians.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I don't know whether I am talking about counterfactual, but I can't think that France or Britain.
Well, France or Britain did. There's a term for it, but in terms of not recognising somebody's neutrality, France and Britain in the Second World War attacked Norway and ignored its neutrality. So there was reasons for that, and that's a different podcast. But if France and Britain thought there was a reason to ignore Turkey's neutrality, it would have done so.
Yeah, but there wasn't a reason to ignore it, though.
Oh, you say that there wasn't a reason. The same reason existed, arguably. There's the whole point of our podcast. Arguably, the same reason existed whether Turkey was neutral or whether it wasn't. So the purpose of the Dardanelles expedition was not to knock Turkey out of the war. It was to gain access to the Black Sea. So there was no intention of conquering, taking over Turkey or whatever. The intention was to get to the Black Sea, to open up the Bosphorus, open up the Dardanelles. So on many occasions in history, countries have ignored people's neutrality because it suits them. Doesn't mean to say that they would, as Germany did in the Second World War, take over those countries. But they would say, well, sorry, look, we need access to X, Y, and Z. You either give it to us or we're going to take it. So it's possible that Britain and France could have, could have attacked it with some excuse of, if you just stay away, we'll happily just be 5 miles from the coast, up through the Dardanelles into the Bosphorus. You mind your own business. I know it's your country, but you mind your own business, and you don't bother us, and we won't bother you. Now, again, that's unlikely to happen, but you never know. There's plenty of examples of that, although I can't think of one, but there are certainly examples of that where countries have come to an arrangement with other countries and allowed them to do things on their territory, turning a blind eye. Now that, and then claiming still to be neutral, claiming have to, Ireland sort of in the Second World War, but not to the same extent. Portugal, etc., etc. But but anyway, but you're right. Primarily, that's less likely, but still a possibility. But Russia, but again, why would Russia attack Turkey? Russia's fully engaged with Germany.
That's what I mean. So the focus really, apart from the Germans dragging them in, let's just make the assumption that they dragged them into the First World War. They got pushed in more than they jumped in.
Who?
The Ottomans.
In which timeline? In the original one.
Yes, in the
Well, that's 100% what happened, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So in the counterfactual, then.
Yeah, but it doesn't do that. I mean, I think it's more interesting.
The focus is on Europe and the Russian front. Instead of the.
Yeah, because I mean, although it's possible that I think that France and Britain could have tried to force the Dardanelles up to the Black Sea, even though Turkey was neutral, I think that's less likely. I think, given the nature of how people did business at that time of of history, given that Britain, in theory, went to war against Germany because they attacked neutral Belgium, which we had a
really gentleman's
agreement with in terms of coming to their defence. It's unlikely and that was the rationale that was being touted in front of the Americans and all the rest of it. It's unlikely that they would have attacked a neutral country like Turkey. I think perhaps the more so let's assume that nobody's fighting.
Anatolia, I think it was called at the time.
I think most people just called it Turkey, John, to be honest. I don't think many people went around.
I was looking at a map and it says Anatolia.
Yeah, but that's a geographic term, isn't it? But it'd be, it's like Iberia. It was like Iberia, isn't it? I mean,
I don't know. Well, I don't know. I'm just looking at this map on Google where it's got Austria, Hungary, Russia.
There's lots of pubs. There's plenty of pubs called the Turk's Head in Britain, isn't there? I mean, that's good. That doesn't date from the 1900s, admittedly, but anyway, I'm happy with Turkey.
Press, yeah.
I think the interesting thing is what happens to Turkey's empire, because wars, even when people aren't involved in wars, Turkey would still draw away its some of its forces to its strategic assets, which are the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles, etc., etc. Yes, it's got to man its borders in far-flung Saudi and Mesopotamia and what have you, but in parts of what is now Greece, but the Greek islands certainly. But it would be struggle a bit like the Roman Empire did. It starts with drawing from the periphery to look after its core. So I think so we've obviously got some interesting characters knocking about on its periphery, or at least one, which is Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah.
The question is, I mean, Britain.
So I mean, it was already in decline. So the Ottoman Empire was already shrinking. There was no doubt about that, and that was unlikely to have stopped just because of the First World War, like you say.
It would have accelerated its decline 100%.
Yeah, but if you look at that in isolation to so let's just take a slight detour and say, okay, so no real World War I action in the Middle East. What would then? Yeah, what do we think the realistic output or outcome of the First World War would be? Would it probably be shorter, wouldn't it? Do you think? Let's stop for a word from our sponsors.
We all know the internet went wild when those geeks at OTechno came to your office and delivered Trumpet, the only online application that didn't just prevent wind from breaking, it damn well broke it. Oh boy, did we snuff that guff. Conference calls have never smelled so sweet. But I hear you say, what about the bigger problem on these calls? Potty mouth. Have you had directives to drop the expletives? Be deaf to the F or just restrain the profane? Fear not. The apprentice code jockeys at OTechno have the answer. When someone's talking number 2, that's when you need trumpet 2. Yes, trumpet 2. But hold on, it's not just F-bombs. We're not going to forget our ABCs. To ease your mind, click on the no to 2 symbol. So if you feel the need to say or even you're home and dry. Oh, tech, no. You've only gone and blummin' done it again.
Today's episode is sponsored by OTechno, helping yesterday, today. OTechno is a subsidiary of Uncle Schnookums Enterprises, wholly owned and operated by Deforest Co. Global, pioneers in transforming the world's rainforests into your favorite products. All rights reserved. No claims or returns will be honored.
And we're back.
Thinking shows. No, I don't think. I think Turkey's involvement in the First World War has any impact at all on its outcome, one way or another.
So all of the troops that were there, which would have been then diverted to
but
Europe, arguably, would have made little difference.
The troops in the Dardanelles were withdrawn, and all the Australians, for example, went to the Western Front. I mean, the British must have done as well.
Yeah, but that wasn't. But what time frame?
1959, 1916. So there was never a shortage of manpower in the First World War, unlike in the Second World War, because of the way that industry changed and the way that the armies changed in terms of the amount of mechanization. The Second World War, the British and even later on to a certain extent the Americans were always short of infantry. Now that wasn't the case in the First World War because there was only really cavalry acting as infantry and infantry. Yes, there were tanks, but there weren't many people in tanks. The British Army in the First World War was up to 4 million men. So there wasn't a shortage of manpower. That's not to say that when the Americans came in with their extra volumes of manpower, that wasn't extremely welcome. But a couple of corps here and there, which is again 60,000 to 70,000 soldiers, 3 divisions. That's not going to make
it's just a at the end of it's part of its counterfactual as to what would have happened, distinctly unchanged.
So Britain is never trusted by other countries because we've got a reputation of perfidious Albion. Don't believe a word that anybody says if you're in the British diplomatic service. Always looking to stoke a bit of division. I think that we got into this in one of the previous podcasts, so keep me straight. The opportunity to ferment revolution in what became Saudi Arabia, Britain would still do that, I think. Britain's got an obvious desire to see the end of the Ottoman Empire. And with any war, wars just create confusion and flux and change.
Well, that might be true, but I don't think that it would be in anything like the timescales of the real world.
Why? Because to a large extent, the Saudi, the Lawrence Arabia revolution was self-generated. It wasn't getting huge. It was getting some, but it wasn't getting huge amounts of munitions or support from Britain and France. So, assuming you can take that spark and make it into a fire, I think it's definitely an opportunity there to look at, say, well, maybe, yeah, you're right. Maybe it wouldn't be quite as fast, but I think it still would have happened. These things.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that something would have happened in that, because, like you say, something was fermenting, but there were other things were going on in the world which would have been different. So instead of there being a focus and battles, men, machinery, all that sort of stuff in that particular area, it would have been, I want to say more peaceful, but it wouldn't have been as, the action wouldn't be taking place there.
Well, so I don't follow that at all. Why don't I?
Well, because if the Allies aren't at war with the Ottomans, because they wouldn't be, then, you're overtly, you're sending troops into a...
Well, no, it doesn't say that. I'm suggesting that the Arabs would have revolted. These revolting Arabs, if you pardon the expression, and Britain.
So they would have.
Britain didn't support. So if you look at what happened in the original timeline, the British Army with some Australians and some Indians. So there was 2 fronts. There was the Mesopotamia front, which was up through the Euphrates, which was never very successful and horrendous, etc., etc. The most successful thing was from Egypt up through Gaza, through Palestine, into what is now Lebanon and into Syria. Now that was in support of the Arabs, the Lawrence of Arabia Arabs with King Saud and all the rest of it. So
we were at war with the Ottomans, remember? So
indeed. But the point, my point being, so the question really is, could the Arabs have defeated the Ottomans on their own without that support from the British, Australians, and to a lesser extent the French, up through Palestine. Now the question is probably yes, because the
Not in the same way.
not in the. It would have been more of an. It wouldn't have been galloping to Damascus. They would have got to. They may have got to Damascus eventually, but it would have been more of an insurgency type scenario where the Turks would have just disappeared. Whether gone back to Turkey, whether they'd have been defeated in the field like they were in the original timeline. And we're not talking about pitched battles, but in terms of running battles, debatable. Whether they would have thought, well, there was lots of. It was only 2-3 years later that what's his name now? Who's the famous Turkish guy? Amal Turk.
Oh, you mean
Who was a secular Turk, didn't believe in running a country just under religious. Ataturk. Sorry, what did I say? Ataturk. Somebody we used to work with.
Ataturk.
Yeah, Ataturk. Yeah, he was. It was 2-3 years later. He took over Turkey. So you could argue that there may have been a palace coup, essentially. Well,
it could, but I mean, I still think you have to look at the timeline. So I mean, that's
I agree.
It could be more of a 20s thing. So the First World War could have been over 3 or 4 years before some significant insurgency within the Ottoman Empire.
Why? What, are you saying that? I can kind of see what you're saying, but are you saying because
you're not going to have
Turkey wasn't an enemy, you haven't got the?
We're not going to send troops into a country that we haven't got war with.
The British troops didn't ferment. It wasn't British troops that took Aqaba from the Turks. It was the Arabs.
No, I know it was. But at the end of the day, the British troops were in Damascus, and they wouldn't have been.
They were in Damascus about a week after the Arabs had returned. About a week.
Yeah, but there wouldn't be any. All I'm saying is there wouldn't be any.
But the Turks had been defeated and left. No, the argument is, would they have? Had they not had Allenby's army on their? I'm trying to think which flank it would be. On their right flank, from their perspective, they could have focused all their energies onto the Arab revolt. I get that, and I agree with you.
What I'm trying to say is that even if the ultimate outcome is the same, what we have to think about is, well, what are the timescales associated with that? And they would be different. There's no doubt there would be some differences. Now, how significant they're going to be, I don't know, but they're going to be. The difference. They're not going to be a week. I don't think they're talking about a week's difference.
Well, no, but all right. The week was. I think the differences are absolutely massive in terms. So once we get to the time, if we accept that the Arabs can persuade by just attrition and atrocities, and you're never going to win here, and your time's up, etc., etc. This is our country. What you're doing here, blah blah blah. All right, I get that. That will take longer, but that means there's no Balfour Declaration, which is that.
That's right. So I mean, there's no doubt that the
Sykes
carving. Yeah, the carving up of that particular geographic area would never have happened. It would have ended up being some sort of.
Well, it would have been different. There certainly wouldn't have been any.
Well, there wouldn't have been any external interference of saying, well, this country's this and this country's that.
And there wouldn't.
If King Saud had have won, which is what you're basically saying, wouldn't he have taken it all over? There wouldn't be Syria.
Yeah, but then it's whether you then. It's whether then. I don't know if you've taken it all over. It's whether he then considers, which I suspect he might have done, that the people in those lands, because Syrians aren't Arabs. Well, they are, but they're not. They're not going across deserts on camels. Arabs, Iraqis that's the word. Iraqis have a large Shia population, as we know, so they're not dissimilar. Some of them to the Persians, to the Iranians. You've got Palestinians who again live in towns and are farmers and stuff, So there's a big chunk of people there who aren't.
So I mean, arguably, you could say there could be even more conflict because there wouldn't have been any colonial type control, with European armies. I mean, there were troops stationed.
Well, yes and no.
There.
Yes and no. It was the
police didn't they enforce the
Yes and no, but by horrendous. I mean, the RAF enforced the British mandate over Iraq by bombing villages. Delightful. There wasn't any great deployment of British soldiers. There were obviously British soldiers in Baghdad, but not many. The way the divide and conquer was the British way, isn't it? Like find somebody who's prepared to be in charge, put them in charge.
That's right, but that would so you're still going to have the people who want to be in charge, but there wouldn't be somebody picking them. They would be whoever.
Well, it could have been. It could have been. But then.
So we're agreed that however it got divided up, the map would be totally different.
Well, you would imagine it'd be more sensible rather than just square lines on a map, which is, if you look at the map, it's patently ridiculous. You would imagine it'd be more tribal. And tribal, I mean
A bit more like Lawrence Arabia's carving up.
Well, I forgot about that. Actually, good point. I wasn't going to jump on that, but you're 100% absolutely right. So where the random countries have split up Shias and Sunnis and various other sects of Islam, that would be less the case. Though you're right, though that could, if you actually group everybody together in their ethnic groups, that gives them an instant reason to dislike the person on the other side of the border. Whereas I suppose if you've got a mix in your own country, it's, you get internecine fighting, it flares up every so often. But, although I'm trying to think, with the exception of Iran and Iraq, and Iran, strictly speaking, isn't Arab, have Arabic countries ever gone to war against each other? Obviously, some Arabic countries joined in the coalition in the first Gulf War against Iraq, but that was kind of against Saddam Hussein rather than Iraq per se. But I don't think any.
Well, yeah, there's been the Iraq-Iran war.
Yeah, but I'm saying Iran, strictly speaking, they're Persians, aren't they?
Yeah, so there's the Sunni.
They don't consider themselves Arabs. They don't consider themselves Arabs. Yeah, but
So there's definitely, I'm pretty certain, let's face it, we're talking about some religious divide and what, they don't go to war. Well, I'm sure that's never happened before.
I'm not saying they don't fight. I'm talking about wars. If you were...
Well, there would only be wars if they were strong enough and had a big enough society to have an army, to have a...
Well, they all do now, so I don't know why they wouldn't.
Not now, but in the 20s, that might not have been true.
The Egyptian army was pretty big in the 20s. It's a very peculiar Egyptian army. Quite a big army.
They wouldn't be involved though, would they? Because they're not part of the...
Well, just using that as an example. In the late 1940s, the armies that fought Israel, mostly officered by British individuals, very peculiar, trying to do away with Israel in that context. But the Arab League, which was a force of soldiers, how good they were, I don't know. But anyway, we're getting slightly tangential here. There would be no Israel, and that's a massive thing, isn't it? That's massive.
Yeah.
There would be no 50,000 dead Gazans in the last 6 months or whatever it is, etc. No, taking us to the brink.
No, I think there's two areas in terms of what would have been potentially significant, and that's probably the most significant, is the fact that there wouldn't be a Jewish state.
So the question is, there's two aspects to that. Is what would happen to all the displaced Jewish people from the end of the Second World War? I mean, there was talk about Uganda, would you believe, in places like that. It's hard to believe that would they have gone? Would they have tried to go to Palestine? Well, I don't see how they could have done. Really, I mean, obviously before Israel existed, they were going there illegally anyway. Well, certainly after the Second World War, they were going there illegally. Obviously, once Israel existed, they could go there legally. But if Israel, it's hard to imagine that upwards of whatever it was, well, certainly millions. I don't know how many Jewish people went to Israel after the Second World War. But obviously there was Jewish people there already before the Second World War. But would they have gone if it had been an area controlled by Saudi forces or such as they existed, or rather than British forces? I don't know.
Well, I mean, there weren't Saudi forces as such, were there? Because they just had tribal.
Well, exactly. That's why I used. That's why I put.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of army didn't really exist, did it? I mean,
but what do you mean by an army? You don't know.
Well, they had lots of armed individuals. Yeah, but they were told
the people with the people with the rifles tell the people without the rifles what to do. I mean, you don't have to.
No, I know, but they're going up against other people with rifle. That's what I'm saying.
Well, they wouldn't be though, would they? Because Israel wouldn't have existed.
No, and that's not there.
So the question is, where Israel, obviously Israel wouldn't exist. There might be Jewish. I mean, there were Jewish people all over the Middle East, and still are to a small degree. But there's lots of Jewish people in Iraq well into the 1960s, and Iran come to that. So they'd all exist. These little pockets of Jewish people minding their own business would still exist. I can't see any reason for them to be persecuted any more than they're being persecuted already, however much that was. But they've lived there for centuries. But I don't think the state of Israel patently wouldn't exist. Now, whether a Jewish homeland would then be required, maybe not. I mean, lots of Jewish people, such as those that survived, went back to even Germany. Would you believe? Some of them went back. Those that survived.
And without a Jewish state in the Middle East, then the tensions in the Middle East arguably wouldn't exist.
100%. Well, how many wars have there been in the Middle East? I mean, there was
that's what I'm saying. So that would be completely different.
Yeah. And think of the terrorism in the 1970s and 1980s
that's right, yeah.
which was prefaced around the Israel issue. The
So
Israel issue.
the other major issue, and I don't know enough about this to whether how different it would be, which was about the oil. Obviously,
Well, Israel doesn't have any oil as such.
no, but don't forget the Ottomans controlled Saudi. If we said there was some sort of Saudi uprising, but it didn't involve anything to do with the Allies. They did it themselves.
Yeah.
Then how there's still. I mean, don't forget Britain sort of decided to have picked Persia, didn't it? To get its oil to support its oil, whereas Saudi chose the Americans. All this type of stuff. There's a that mix would be different potentially, or wouldn't have happened, or I don't know. That could have created more military tensions if they were not interested. I don't know. It's just one of those. That one's an unknown to me, but would have some difference in terms of the larger, the larger impact. It might not have much of an impact, or it might have.
Well, you don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I get the impression that the Saudis in the 50s were very much business stroke transactional, as the terminology these days based. They didn't have any great. They wanted people to come in to exploit their oil reserves and give them the results, which is money. And that was true of some of the Gulf states and what have you. Whether they'd liberated the whole of the Middle East, inverted commas, on their own, would that have given them a different view as to where they were in the world? I think it would have done. What difference that would have made, I don't know. They would be a block. Now, even if they accept that they didn't rule the whole area, so just replace the Ottoman, but allowed individual countries to develop, albeit slightly different lines on the map to what's there today, no, Israel, they would have a massive influence. They would have been a liberating power, for want of a better expression, a bit like America and Europe in the 1940s and 50s. So they would probably look at themselves as the Arab voice. To some extent, they do so anyway. But they would certainly have thought that of that earlier, and see themselves as a block in the same way that Europe is now. And America used to be. So yeah, there's lots of and they and that's developing now. Look at Qatar is always the go-to place now for negotiations, as they host negotiations with the varying warring parties of the various wars we've got at the moment. So the Saudis might have been doing that from the 50s and 60s and would be quite a powerful bloc. In the same way you think of United Nations and there's the Europeans and NATO and America and the West and there's Russia and India, they could have been a big bloc of influence from the 50s and 60s. Now, what impact that would have made on any particular issue? But I think it's worth taking a recap. So I think if Turkey stroke the Ottoman Empire had stayed neutral, I don't think that would have any huge impact on the First World War. It was a sideshow. It failed. I mean, in the original timeline, the Gallipoli campaign failed. Even if it had succeeded, like a lot of Churchill's plans, you think, well, you've succeeded in knocking Turkey out of the war. You've got access to the Black Sea and up through the Danube and the various.
What are you going to do now?
Well, exactly. So so the Russian army wasn't capable of beating anybody, frankly. So you can give them as much of the First World War. You can give them as many arms and support as you like, but what are they going to do with it? It would have had little impact. However, there would have been no agreement at Versailles to power slap to split up the Ottoman Empire, because it would still exist. Now, it might be in revolution.
Right, yeah. It might be having some internal struggles, but that's nothing to do with the Versailles Agreement.
Well, exactly. You can't just come along and say, well, the fact that you've withdrawn soldiers from Syria, Lebanon, Saudi, blah, blah, blah.
First World War at the end.
No, exactly. And there's nothing to do with the Americans or the French, and there would be no agenda, there would be no, appetite for France and Britain in the 1920s to go carving up parts of the world. That's about 1880s. Nobody's doing that anymore. So they would be carving up their own countries, creating their own countries, a bit like the Soviet Union breakup, arguably. But the borders would be completely different. That might have
but it wouldn't have had any impact on the Second World War because there wasn't any significant
can't
fronts or action in that particular part of the world at the time.
Well, there was some battles, and obviously in Lebanon against the Free French and stuff, but those were sideshows. Those were attempts to knock the Free French out of that part of the world. But some horrendous goings on there. But but nothing that was strategic, shall we say? Which but the major thing is, imagine a world with no Israel in it. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. But certainly, what that would have meant for the Jewish people, I don't know. I think
But it doesn't necessarily mean that there wouldn't be one. It just if there was one, it wouldn't be there.
But it's hard to. I mean, it's a completely different podcast, but it's difficult to imagine a Jewish state not in
Jerusalem. Yeah,
Well, exactly. The historical.
Yeah.
You could do it in Uganda or wherever, but that's.
What's the point of that? Was one of the other options.
Was it okay? What's the point of that? Why? If you don't go back to your ancestral homelands, in inverted commas, from 2,000 years ago, contentious statement. Where'd you go? Well, why don't you just go back to where you came from, which was Germany, Poland? Now, I can get why you might not want to do that, but if you haven't got any alternative, there's plenty of Jewish people in Poland. There's obviously a fraction of what there should be, but
yeah, I mean, even at the time in the First World War, there was lots of Jewish people, in that part of the world.
Yes, but I'm talking about what if there's no state of Israel? What do they do post Second World War?
Well, I think you mentioned it before. There's nothing stopping going back. They just
most
have their own.
I don't even know. I don't even know what
group within a different.
Exactly. I don't even know what percentage of Jewish people who were still alive. Notwithstanding the fact that many of them, not the majority of them, have been killed or murdered. I'm not sure what percentage actually went to Israel. I mean, I don't think it was a huge number in the 50s because Israel was a very poor country, which was always on the cusp of being overrun. I think it goes through phases. I should imagine it's not that popular now, frankly, for obvious reasons. But it depends sometimes what's happening in the original home countries. I mean, it was only a few years ago that people were speculating that British Jewish people would quite happily go to Israel because of all the anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and newspapers and various other things. I think, but I suspect that isn't the case now. And how much of that was just nonsense in newspapers, you never know. But it's an interesting thing that we.
It was quite. I've just looked it up, in terms of. So at the end of the First World War, there were probably about 70,000 people who were Jewish in Palestine, in the Ottoman Palestine.
Yeah.
Iraq had roughly the same.
Yeah.
Iran had more. Probably 90,000. Syria, 25,000. Yemen, 40,000. Egypt, 40,000. Turkey. In fact, Turkey's probably at the most. Although the Sephardic Jews, 120, 130,000. So they were spread out, but after the Second World War, they could have just been spread out the same, couldn't they? So.
But I was thinking primarily I wasn't thinking of them. Most of them stayed where they were.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
You said Sephardic. I'm talking about the so-called Ashkenazi Jews, which are the European population of Jewish people. So they obviously would have an incentive not to go back to Germany.
Well, mate, yeah. I mean, it would. So no Jewish state, no reason to send people. No reason to go to a Jewish state.
Well, exactly. Well, it wouldn't even have crossed your mind because it was never be an option.
It wasn't an option.
Well, although as you said, there are Jewish people there already. So, but then if Britain was criticised in the mid 40s or the 1947-48 period for 46-47 period for not allowing people to go to Israel, you imagine what a Arab state would be like. Well, it just wouldn't be an option, would it? It just wouldn't be an option. It's no Arab state is going to allow 5 million Jewish people to suddenly turn up. In fact, no state today allows any foreign bunch of people just to turn up.
I mean, I know this will sound like a daft question then. So why did they create a Jewish state?
That's a good question. But because
I don't know. I was just thinking. I don't know what drove it. What was.
I think without Googling it, the short answer is they did it themselves. The British left and said good luck, and they managed to fight off the Arab forces. So it was a while before the first country, I think America, recognized it as a state, and then gradually every other country started. And some countries don't recognize it, obviously, to this day. But it was a question of Britain's mandate was coming to an end. Britain couldn't afford to police it. I had no interest in policing it, and said, right, we're leaving. And whoever's here, good luck. And they fought it out. So an Israeli state, you know that Googling it, but an Israeli state.
I am, yeah. So it's strange enough. It's interesting because it starts off from the First World War.
Yeah. There's a Balfour.
Where it's saying no, that was before then. So during World War I, Britain hoped to rally international Jewish support, particularly in the US, where there was absolutely large Jewish communities, to influence public opinion. Russia, where morale was collapsing and the Jews were active in revolutionary and anti-Tsarist movements.
Oh, I'm surprised given the pogroms that they were subject
no, that's
to.
right, yeah. So they were hoping to, get, because obviously there's a lot of Jewish people around the world, and they were hoping to get them on their side in terms of supporting the war, to get, I think, sounds like particularly the American involved. So the Balfour Declaration, this was a letter from British, blah, blah, to you with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people who will use their best endeavours to facilitate it. And I should have read a load of stuff now. So after the First World War, the League of Nations granted Britain the mandate for Palestine in 1920, which included implementing the Balfour Declaration. Over time, Britain struggled to balance Jewish immigration and Arab opposition. So it was after the First World War then when they started, Jewish immigration into...
Yeah, indeed. But the obviously it increased massively after the second.
Then there was the Arab Revolt, 1936, 1939, which is...
Yeah, so there was lots of murders going on and pogroms in Palestine of one village attacking another and all the rest of it, as humans do delightfully.
So it's lots of immigrants into an area, different religion, and then suddenly there's lots of violent uprisings, and then Britain says that, well, we've had enough in 1948.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, and the state of Israel was declared.
Yeah, but that wouldn't have, that in our timeline, none of that would happen. Well,
No, it wouldn't. Yeah, because it wouldn't have been
difficult. Well, there might have still been immigration, but it wouldn't have been as big.
But it would have been backed by a country that won one of the wars.
Correct.
Yeah, because they wouldn't have been.
Well, it depends what you mean by that. If you mean America in the Second World War, I agree with you.
Well, no, I'm just talking about Britain in the.
Yeah, Britain didn't actively encourage it. It just didn't do anything to stop it.
Yeah. So whether the US encouraged immigration to Palestine, I don't know.
Let me preface my previous statement. It certainly didn't after the Second World War. It wanted it to happen, and it was the first countries to recognise the state of Israel. So obviously, there's lots of Jewish people in America, which is fine and entitled to their opinion. But they had no interest in anything, frankly, after the First World War, did they? America first, all that nonsense. America first, yeah. Guess what happens if you do that for 20 years? Somebody attacks you without warning. But they'll learn eventually one of these days. But they had no interest in supporting an Israeli state in the after the First World War. But yeah, so it's interesting. I think if the Turkish / Ottoman Empire is neutral in the First World War, the implications to the present day are massive.
Yeah, very far-reaching.
Yeah,
completely different look and feel to the world.
Yeah, half a dozen wars wouldn't have happened. Maybe half a dozen different wars would have happened, but I think it's less likely. In the current state on humanity, shall we say, of conflict in Palestine, Israel, Gaza, whatever you want to call it, wouldn't exist.
The Middle East,
something else. Yeah, but this Middle East isn't specific. But I have to think that the Middle East is a bit of an old-fashioned term.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does encompass a lot of areas where, anyway, yeah. I don't know what the correct term would be.
Well, it depends what you're talking about. I think people just generally use country names now, don't they? I don't think broad brush terminologies work anymore. They reek of.
Yeah, but we're old, so we still use.
Speak for yourself. If it's
well, I'm old then, and you're
only 42. Do you remember? That's not that's. But no, so
if you add them together, yeah. Anyway, sorry.
What 6? It's But yeah, no, it's a good one. People think that history is,
This would be nice. This is one of those ones. Well, not one of those ones, because most of our podcasts would be nice to add somebody who knew more about a specific area of the discussion we had to feed in some,
somebody who knows about the creation of the Israeli state with how it came about and how it may not have come about. Yes.
The call goes out to our global listenership. If there is anybody who wants to join us in this particular podcast,
but we don't want any. We don't want any agendas. We don't want any with agendas. No agendas, please. Just historical facts and speculation. Yeah,
having an imagination.
And nobody, saying if only these people hadn't done that, wouldn't it be better? Well, that's not how it works, is it? I don't know what consequences are. But okay.
Well, that's it. We've come to the end of this one turned out to be rather interesting, probably more than I was expecting. Well, I would say more than I was expecting. All of ours are interesting. They always go off at some sort of funny tangent, and then we should learned a bit more about this or researched a bit more about that. So,
Anyway, thanks everybody for listening today. We'll be doing another podcast soon. We've got some other podcasts coming up with some guests as well, so look out for those. But for now, thanks for listening. Look out for us for the next podcast. Bye for now.
Bye.
And that's it. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. But after listening to us natter on, why not let us know what you think? Find us on Blue Sky by searching for Chats in Time. On Facebook, search ORC Time. And on X, we are ORC_time. Until next time, cheerio!